So the topic that I chose to cover in my news analysis is one that actually had to do with Sharon Osbourne, and I'm not sure if many of you keep up with a lot of daytime talk shows like I do. It's because personally it's the career route that I want to go on, working in media. Sharon Osbourne was fired from her show by NBC on her show called The Talk, which she was a co-host of, for coming in defense of her friend Piers Morgan. And I'm not sure if many of you keep up with the whole Meghan Markle and Prince Harry fanatical issue that's been going on. I don't even know how to describe it anymore. It's been like going on for way too long. But Sharon Osbourne's friend Piers Morgan was basically accused of being a racist, and he was fired from his show because he's known to be a long critic of Meghan Markle, where he was completely against like the remark that she made in her Oprah interview about the royal family, where she said that they were disregarding her mental health. At the same time, she accused the royal family of being racist, which I also disagree with. I don't think the royal family would have such views, to be honest. And he essentially saw her as slandering the royal family. And of course, as a Brit, he took great offense to that. But a lot of people were accusing him of not liking Meghan Markle because for 4 years he honestly has been like very much against her. But that's because they kind of had like a sour relationship, to be honest. And at the same time, she's been kind of tarnishing the reputation of the royal family when she first entered it, and at the same time when she was going through Megxit, because she and Harry were having high demands where they still want to be working royals and try to use their titles, the royal titles such as Duke and Duchess of Sussex, for profit, which the royal family is not supposed to do. So he has his rights for being very critical of them because, of course, his tax-paying money would also fund them. But a lot of people were saying, mostly like from the US, that he simply doesn't like Meghan because he's racist, and that he made like racist comments towards her, which he hasn't. And Sharon Osbourne was defending him because they're actually very close friends. And at the same time, like on their show, The Talk, she was telling her co-host, who kept pressing her on the issue of Piers being racist, Sharon kept telling her co-host, Cheryl, please point out to me what has he said that was racist. And Cheryl couldn't respond to that. And then a controversy stemmed where NBC later decided to terminate Sharon Osbourne's contract, saying that their views don't align with her views. And eventually Sharon Osbourne was like let go from the show. And a lot of people took offense to that because if you look at the interview that Piers Morgan had conducted on Good Morning Britain about Meghan Markle, he really had not made any like racial connotations, had not made any racist comments, and at the same time, as Sharon was defending him, she hasn't made any racist comments as well. So at the same time, a lot of people were attributing this to woke culture and cancel culture, and that's where the issue comes up to where, for example, there's this big stigma and this big controversy that if you want to work in media, that you can't have a diversity of thought, you can't have conservative views, and a lot of people were saying that Sharon Osbourne was simply cancelled for that because she took a stand against Meghan Markle by defending her friend Piers Morgan, and she was wrongfully terminated from her position for that. And a lot of people were saying that she shouldn't have been fired for her speech in the first place for defending Piers Morgan because she's defended under like the First Amendment. And that's where a big problem starts to stem from. It's because I personally did not know what extent the First Amendment actually protects you in the workplace, truthfully, because I used to think it would have wider protections, but it seems that there's limitations to that as well. Because here in the US, when it comes to the First Amendment, as I was doing more research on it for this assignment, it turns out that the First Amendment does not protect you in the private sector. Doesn't matter what your career is. You could be working in the media, you could be working for a marketing company or a public relations company. The First Amendment has its limitations when it comes to protecting your speech. As Americans over here, and Sharon Osbourne, she was working for an American company. She's a British citizen as well, but she has residency here in the US, of course, and the show is based in the US, The Talk. Naturally, she has the First Amendment rights as well, but the First Amendment is very limited when it comes to its protections of speech. Here's one example. When it came to the National Labor Relations Act, that actually protects workers' rights or their rights to speech in the workplace, it's limited to only protecting speech when it comes to, for example, reporting harassment, or when it comes to threatening speech, or when it comes to reporting issues that can lead to public safety. So other than that, there isn't much protection when it comes to it when it's in regards to that act. So you could be working for the public sector, you'll have like those protections, but at the same time, the Act's protections don't extend onto the private sector. And that's the issue with the First Amendment too. It's because it mostly has to do with public institutions. It doesn't have a big extent of protections when it comes to the private sector. And there's been some court cases in regards to that. There hasn't been too many that set a precedent when it comes to the private sector. Or actually, I would say there aren't really any at all because I couldn't find any, but there's two court cases I was able to find which did set precedents of protection of speech in the workplace, and one of them was the Elrod versus Burns case, in which the court found that speech was being violated because there was a sheriff in Cook County where he was only filtering out applicants for a position based on the preference of their political parties, where he wasn't going to hire anybody if they didn't belong to a specific party that he supported. And that, of course, was a violation that he broke. And that was one of the first cases that set a precedence that was later followed on, like 4 years later, by Branty versus Finkel, because there's an issue with that had to do with governmental workers having their speech suppressed by being terminated from their positions based on the political views that they had or the political parties that they belonged to. But the court ruled in their favor later on for those governmental employees because it found that both their First Amendment and the 14th Amendments were being violated, and it was meant to protect them. It was meant to protect the government workers. So then again, those two court cases only had to do specifically with governmental workers and public workers, not so much with those working in the private sector. And that's a major issue, truthfully, because in my opinion there should be more protections for people working in the private sector. It's because I want to work in the media. I don't want to be a person that has to really filter out my perspectives and views. I want to be very neutral, like for example when it comes to like the journalistic aspects of it. But here's the issue with that: if you want to work in media, you want to state the truth for what it is. You want to be able to have discussions. You want to be able to talk about these things more freely, especially when it came to Meghan Markle, and there's two sides arguing on complete opposite ends in her regards, whether her claims were true or claims were false when it came to her insults against the royal family. For example, especially when she's making major accusations such as the royal family is racist, the institution is racist, you're supposed to be able to have a discussion on that and hear from both perspectives, like why do you think it is like that, what facts do you have that support it. But when you can't have that, how are you going to maintain both your credibility as, like, let's say a talk show host or a journalist who's supposed to open these discussions up about those like key topics? But people, I would say, in the industry, especially here in media and like the entertainment industry, I think they do put their careers in bigger risks, especially it's because they can be very vocal about their thoughts, their opinions. So at the same time, it kind of kills the purpose of having a show, for example, called The Talk or even The View, where you can't express these different opinions. There's only one side that's brought into it, and the dangerous thing is that, for example, in Sharon Osbourne's case, if you're being accused of being a racist for defending your friend who at the same time had not made any racist statements, because if you watch the videos, if you read the transcripts or like his history throughout, he hasn't said anything racist. So how can you be fired for defending someone who's in the right position? That's completely wrong. Like, there's no morale in it. Even as a journalist, you're always supposed to like report the truth. Even you could be a talk show host for an entertainment cable network like that too. Again, at the same time, you shouldn't just be making up stuff and making false accusations against somebody, where in Sharon's case she lost her career. She was on this show for almost a decade. So how do you protect against that? But not just at the same time, the fundamental aspect that comes to that though is, how do you protect your speech? How are you able to have these conversations? How are you able to defend your friend or yourself from slander if it's only going to lead to your career at the same time getting canceled? And that's been a major problem. Again, I have friends who work in media, and this is always a topic that's coming up. It's because many of them at the same time feel like they don't have like the same freedoms of being able to express their opinions on topics that they need to cover, or like their views on it as well. So where do you get those freedoms from? How do you defend your speech if there's no precedent set on that too? And that's like the issue too, when there's no court precedent set on it. How do you protect it if you want to take a case to judges at the same time? So it's a very, very dangerous situation, especially since, again, there's court precedences that lead to protection of freedom of speech in the public sector when you're working for government organizations, but we don't have any for the private sector. And there is truth in that too, where I guess people can say that if your views don't align with the company, why are you working with them, or why should they work with you? But at the same time, if you want to really make it like that, black and gray, for example, then every worker is going to be like divided on that. There's going to be people who should not be working for companies that have a more liberal stance, and then there's people who should not be working for companies that have a more conservative stance. So here in the US, like, we really, really go thin on that by making it very like black and gray or black and white, or however you want to describe that situation. And I think that's going to become an issue. I have my strong opinions on it as well. I think Sharon Osbourne was wrongfully fired for defending Piers Morgan. And I really personally do think that her rights were violated. Yes, she did have the ability to express her speech, to express her thoughts, but at the same time, she should not have had to suffer the consequences of it, which was eventually those false accusations of her being racist and Piers Morgan being racist eventually did destroy her career as a talk show host.